What's up, everybody? Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being here. This is Rolling with Reason, episode number 36. My name's Will Gerals, and I have no idea what I'm doing with this thing. And I hope you're ready for this sporadic, intuitive thought process that I am about to just let rip, because that's how this has been going. I have no script here. I'm not sure why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm just kind of doing it, but I kind of get on here and talk about my week. Hope you guys had a great week. And so I'm just kind of going to lay that out there. And then whenever this closes up, that's going to be that. So we had three big major things that kind of happened this week. Clark Gracie, first of all, came in from San Diego. Check him out. Amazing guy. Great at Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. If you guys didn't know, you should know. Go check him out. He's doing amazing things. Just won Worlds this year at IBJJF Nogi over in Las Vegas. I was there to watch it. It was really cool. We also went over the deployment process and associated with web applications. For anybody who's been here before, you know that I like to build web applications via programming systems and designs. And so I'm figuring that out and I'm working on that, and it's going really well. However, I should say that the deployment process is kind of a tricky and cumbersome process. And so that's kind of interesting. We're going to dive into that and touch into that. And then I would say the last thing is we had a job change. We're changing different sites. And so, yeah, that's what we're figuring out. That's what we're doing. Yeah, thanks for tuning in. If you guys are here, without further ado, we're going to jump right into it and talk about web applications. So there's kind of like three main ways to do the deployment process in association with applications. One of the big things that's kind of tied to and with that process is what we call environment variables. Now, there's also other ways to be able to handle this process of kind of protecting your secrets in association with a web application that you're going to make public. Now, the other method or means, if I'm going to be quite honest, I have no idea what it is. I read it like once or twice and I kind of forgot it because I focused on the more conventional route, and that's the one of the environment variables. And so to give you guys a sense of what environment variables is, I'm just kind of going to like lay out maybe this kind of conceptual thought around the web applications. So when you go to serve or host a web application, you're essentially containerizing an app and you're connecting it to a computer. And then that computer boots up that process and it starts running it. And so now that your server's running, you have some stuff that is very specific to the way that it interacts with the internet to protect you from things like malicious behavior and what we would call black hats. Black hats are malicious hackers that we don't want to access our stuff. And so the way that we protect against that is kind of handling what I called, or what is conventionally called, these environment variables. And so those are loaded in at runtime, I believe, is a good way to think about it, because once this process starts to spin up, it kind of takes like all these settings and it throws them in, and then the app is configured as it should be and it's running. Anytime that goes down or anything, it makes a separation of concerns, and it needs to re-put those values back in when the application is started up again. We work with one that's called Django, and then there's a whole slew of intricate server-oriented stuff as far as where it's actually hosted. But what we did this first time around is using what is called a PaaS, which is a platform as a service. When you're working with a platform as a service, it's nice. They handle a lot of maybe this kind of overhead stuff, these overcomplications that you would normally have to deal with. And that stuff that I'm talking about is using a software called Docker, which is used for this containerization of your applications. There's also the process and the setting up of the database. You also have these things called static files. You also have media. And so all that stuff takes a little bit of setup. In our process, though, we were able to use a third-party package called White Noise. And then there's three different points within the application that you set that up within it. You set that up within what's called the installed apps. And that goes before the Django or Django's specific static file setting. There's also the middleware, which is kind of the process for the request and response cycle. When a request comes in, it goes top down, response is bottom out, and that's kind of an association with security and the way that that framework works and sets up everything internally. And then the last thing you need to set up is the storages. And that's so you can point to this compressed file, kind of static file setup for serving your application. Why is that stuff relevant? Well, because static files are these things that you use for CSS or images. You also use them for your styling. Your styling is your CSS, and that's also a list of other things amongst that. But we have to collectively put those into a singular place. And that's so our platform that we're using as a service, which in this case is called Heroku, so it can actually access all of those files and serve them correctly. Now, that is one of the deployment process, maybe procedures, right? Is using this platform as a service. Another way you could do this is with something called a VPS, which is a virtual private server. Now, how does that work? That works in conjunction with kind of a list of, man, I would say like cloud providers, maybe. So a very famous one is called DigitalOcean. And so you can like rent out these things called droplets, which essentially is like a machine. And then you put this virtual private server on there, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a computer hosted on their hardware, and then you point everything to that. But you still have to set up what we call your database being something like Postgres. And so we're kind of getting a little bit of down the rabbit hole, and you guys can kind of see how this is a little different, right? And so that's kind of the second orientation of deployment. And then I would say the last implementation of the deployment is using something like your own server. And so if you're going to do that, you're going to use Docker again, right? You're going to have an image on there, probably for server administration type task. Then you're going to have what you would call the Postgres setup. For this instance, we would probably use a web server called Ninjix. We'll probably use that in comparison with something like Gunicorn or Gunnycorn. I'll be honest, I don't really know how to say that, but it's like corn is kind of how it's spelled. But yeah, so that's going to be the actual app server, I believe. And so what happens is you have the Django. That's the framework that's handling all the logic for the application. It talks to Gunicorn or Gunnicorn, however you say that, the application server. And then that talks to the web server, which is Ninjix. And then that is kind of what opens your port up to the internet via this Docker container. The Docker container is really nice because it gives you isolation. And so what I mean by that is everything is hosted within that kind of containerization. So it kind of keeps it separate from your actual machine to some degree. And so it's nice because in the case of ever having anything like malicious attacks on your code or having any problems conflicting with that actual process, sorry, I'm kind of blanking here, but I guess what I'm trying to say is if you had any problems, you'd be able to tear that image down and you'd be able to redeploy it pretty effectively, catching and correcting the issue. The nice thing is when you start looking at maybe like the total picture as far as deployment is concerned, you see and understand how the database is actually separated away. It's abstracted away. It resides in what we call a bucket, and that bucket is kind of just a fancy way of saying it's a directory, even though it's not really a directory. Anybody who's a programmer that hears that is going to be like, man, what is this guy talking about? That's fine. Listen, it's okay. But we also have the serving of media. So that would be images and videos. And that's relative to the degree that media will sit in its own kind of little bucket or its own little place. And conventionally, I think right now in these times, it would be called what is S3. So AWS, which is associated with Amazon, has created a nice tool that integrates really well with the technology and the stuff that we're using to make it easier for us to use that technology on our applications. And the last thing is the static files. So the cool thing about using Ninjix is it kind of abstracts away, which is the web server. It abstracts away that complication of having to add 3 different points within your running application prior to the deployment process. Of course, putting in that white noise third-party package and setting it up. Whereas if we just use the Ninjix web server, then we can actually just point that directly to the things that we needed to for it to host the static files. And so that's a really nice thing to think about and to look at, and it's really interesting. It's really cool. But yeah, so that's kind of what we've been brushing up on and looking at. Like I said, we have two applications, web applications that are now up and running, like people can access. I don't necessarily want to give out the names here just because they're kind of more or less like tutorial projects, but nonetheless, it's still very cool that we got those up and running. And hence the reason I say every week that we're just so busy. Like we're trying to like learn and retain all this stuff. And I love it. I really do. I love this whole process of just trying to figure out what I'm doing in that realm, why I'm doing it, you know. Amongst like doing this stuff, doing the podcast stuff and also editing videos and also just enjoying my time outside of work right now. Speaking of work, the job changed, so that's really cool. So we were working outside recently, and now we're transitioning back inside, and so that's going to be really nice. It's going to be super beneficial. At least as far as my mental health is concerned, I think to some degree, just because it's less of a burden on my vehicle. It's like less of a cleaning job that I have to do every weekend because being outside in the industry and the field that I'm in, you get a lot of dirt, you get a lot of mud, and so with that being said, it can make it very difficult to um, I guess I guess it can make it very difficult to use your time adequately on the weekends as you typically would in comparison to what your vehicle has now been bestowed upon with. And so, being inside, that's kind of going to mitigate that kind of leniency of processes that I have on the weekend and kind of make them more fixed. And I really enjoy having like a more schedule oriented thing. And so that's awesome. It's a lot of fun and not a lot of fun, but it's a lot better. It's a lot more enjoyable. And so that will make me have more time doing the things that I want to do and I need to do. The next thing I want to talk about is Clark Gracie. Clark Gracie came down. For any of you that know, I have a YouTube channel called Off Grid Grappler, and on that channel, we kind of go over and we talk about jujitsu. They're jujitsu videos. That's what it is. That's what I love to do as well. It's kind of like my main go-to thing is jujitsu. And so he came down and we had a seminar, and it's very cool. He was talking stuff and teaching stuff about what is called lasso guard, which is a guard that is very good and a lot of fun to play in with what we call the gi, maybe some other martial arts know it as the kimono. And so this kind of guard is something that I believe is one of the best guards personally. I played a lot myself. Even before he came down, I didn't really know what he was instructing on or what he was kind of teaching. And so I didn't know that that was going to be what he was talking about. And so he started talking about that, and I thought that was phenomenal. I thought that was amazing. And I say that because, man, for me, like I kind of already play it. I played a good reasonable bit, and there's stuff I've been piecing together and I've been touching on. And so having him come down, teach that, I thought that was amazing. That was a lot of fun. And yeah, so he taught some sweep oriented things. He talked about a lot of omoplatas because it's a very accessible move submission from that kind of setup in the first place. You can kind of roll underneath. You can do what we call inverting, which is kind of like the same process. There's even like a little stand-up kind of roll through thing that you can do that I like. I think it's really enjoyable. And then there's also just like working from that position. You know, maybe if you get stuck in that position, maybe you want to progress farther forward, right? And you want to do a big emphasis on kind of, if it doesn't work out, what do I do from here? And so he touched on that a lot, and I had a lot of fun going through that whole process, just seeing the whole process. Because for me, that's one of the more uh, demanding things of jujitsu is kind of working through these processes and ingraining them in your memory. And even though you may have processes and things that work for you at a moment in time, adapting that and seeing it through somebody else's eyes, and then changing your structure, changing your game plan, and kind of, I guess, giving yourself more cards in your deck. It can make it a lot. It can make your game a lot more well-rounded. It can make it a lot better. And so, uh, again, for anybody that doesn't know Clark, he just won Worlds last year in Las Vegas. He did a phenomenal job. He submitted a lot of people, and he's just a great guy. And so, with that being said, uh, having him come down and just kind of having that good, awesome, spirited personality, that kind of aura that he brings is really awesome. And we got to do some omoplatas, like I said, which are always fun. A couple special moves that I don't want to leak out there too far. You guys got to do a seminar if you want to see those. But yeah, it was just an overall, I would say, a very good weekend. We made some very good progress on the video for the Arnolds. That should be posted pretty soon. And so I'm happy about that. And I'm just kind of happy with how everything's going right now. Taking on some other endeavors, of course, as far as photography is associated, as well as just kind of orienting myself to maybe make some changes occupationally, but we'll see what happens. You know, nothing's ever set in stone, and that's the beautiful thing about this life that we have on this earth, I think, is, you know, nothing is actually true and factual to the degree that uh, it's inevitable. Maybe some things are, but maybe we'll talk about that in a different episode. But I had a great time talking on this episode of Rolling with Reason. I hope you guys liked it. I nerded out there at the beginning. I really enjoyed talking about the seminar, having him come down, getting to see some old friends since I'm, not training down here as much in the town that I normally reside in, and I'm kind of away a lot up towards the big city called Columbus. And so, yeah, I had a lot of fun seeing those guys, seeing those people, seeing old friends. And then, like I said, occupationally changing is going to be good. I think it's going to orient our structure better to be able to facilitate better processes, and just keep grinding, keep working on what we're working on. And so all this stuff's exciting. It's got me pumped about moving forward, and I can't wait to come back next week and kind of fill you guys in. I hope you guys had a tremendous week. If you guys are listening to this on your car rides or whatever, I hope it makes it easier for you. I hope it makes your day easier. I hope you know that I'm excited about floating on this rock in space. I'm not sure what any of us are doing here. I'm not sure what I'm doing with these, but I do enjoy having you guys tune in and make comments or listen to the videos. Big shout out here at the end of the video. There was a younger guy. His name's Zane. What's up, Zane? I know you're gonna watch this because you said you've been watching. I also know that you've been leaving comments. And hey, man, I'm happy you got your blue belt, man. Congratulations. I think that's so awesome. Keep your head up. Keep working strong, man. You're gonna do great things, man. You keep that head up and just keep moving forward. That's kind of one of my things, right? Stay resilient and keep moving forward. And that's what we're doing here. That's what I'm doing on this rock. I hope you guys enjoy this. If you did, leave a comment. Let me know how you guys are feeling about it. Let me know if you enjoy it. Let me know if you don't. Let me know why you listen. Let me know if you don't listen. Well, I don't know how you can do that, but it doesn't matter. Thank you for tuning in. Episode number 36 of Rolling with Reason. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening. Stay resilient, embrace the struggle, and keep moving forward.